Welcome to RiskIQ Radio.
RiskIQ Radio.
We're in.
Hey, Hans.
Jack, good evening. How are you?
Very good. Now it's Saturday morning for you, right?
It's 1:15.
1:15 in the afternoon.
That's right.
And where are you? In Hong Kong or Taiwan or where?
That's right. In Taiwan.
In Taiwan. So welcome into the Valley Current. It's kind of a late night edition. We've actually never done one this late, but now that we're reaching out internationally for RiskIQ to talk about how RiskIQ has become international in many different ways, and you're helping that lead that charge. So maybe I should just start with, how did you come to RiskIQ, and tell us a little bit about your journey to get to RiskIQ?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I heard about RiskIQ several years ago. A buddy of mine who I worked with in Germany, I followed his career. He followed mine, just from our respective places in the globe, and so he and I were working on a project together in Germany. He went off and did his own thing. I kind of did the same, but again, we kind of stayed in touch. And I noticed that he went over to this startup company called RiskIQ, and at the time he was working for a big brand company, and he walked away from that, and he went over to a small startup. So it was just kind of interesting. So of course that drew me in to see what was really happening with this company, RiskIQ, and why would it attract this guy over to it. So years later, he was there, he was happy, he was helping the company to grow, leading a lot of the sales engineers and a lot of the customer engagement kind of activities globally. And he knew I was in Taipei, and he knew he was tired of flying back and forth from the US out to Asia. And so he just asked the question. He's like, hey, are you are you happy where you are? Do you want to be a part of an interesting journey and expansion into Asia for this company? And so after a few conversations with some of the leadership, it was an easy decision for me just to move over, help fill a gap, and help with the expansion into Asia. And so that's kind of what brought me in.
I mean, it's interesting. A lot of people don't realize that the best way of doing recruiting is through people who are existing employees. And a lot of people think, oh, you hire a headhunter, or you spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, or you do a bunch of ads, or I tell you, that's just not very effective. It's a little bit like word of mouth among CIOs or CTOs or CSOs. That is so much more valuable in actually making a sale or expanding an account than any sort of advertising that you could do. But of course, companies don't really understand that, but I think RiskIQ does. So tell us what you're doing for RiskIQ there. RiskIQ obviously has had kind of an interesting journey. I can tell that story I did on some of the other podcasts, because I'm the one who actually named the company. Lou and I were walking in San Francisco talking about what's the right name. And I said, hey, why don't we combine this notion of risk and intelligence and IQ? And we had batted around 50 other names. And he said, I said RiskIQ. He said, let's go for it. Let's get the .com, which we did. And we quickly were off to the races. So it's quite a good story that you were sort of attracted through a friend. And I'm sure the name had a little bit of a pizzazz for you. But tell us what you're doing now.
And it's interesting, so before I get to that, the name. So now when you look across the industry, there are so many companies who have since adopted the same structure, right? So the whatever IQ that they've, and I think that has something to do with, the RiskIQ has been around for almost a decade now.
More than a decade.
Yes. And definitely the leader in this space. And so it's easy to not have to innovate, to just follow the leader and try to, hang on the coattails there.
Right.
And so I think that's what's happened, and that's what I've seen in Asia. But my specific role is, so in the beginning, I was doing everything technical: pre-sales, post-sales, partnership development. Basically, I was the APAC arm for RiskIQ, first employee and permanent person in region. And so, prior to me joining, people they dropped in from the US or from, different parts of the globe, and they would, do those same functions. So my role is really technical. I mean, my actual title at the moment is technical director for APAC. There are 4 technical directors globally for the company, and it's everything. It's everything from Japan all the way down to Australia, New Zealand, out to India, and then of course here in Taiwan, Hong Kong, kind of the whole mix, Southeast Asia. But yeah, it's helping to lead the growth, getting the partners, excited about what we do, really educate them on what we do. And then of course the customers, same situation, give them an understanding of what we have as offerings, and then ultimately deliver that. So now our team has grown a bit, but in the early days, it was, 3 years ago, it was me, and then some other people helping along the way in different capacities. So it's been a wild journey.
What's this whole COVID thing done to life in where you are right now and in the region you serve? I guess it's more these Zoom meetings and conference calls and Skypes and obviously email and everything else. But you're not traveling anymore, right? You're not going to any of these other localities. You're pretty much homebound, right?
Definitely. Most everybody is impacted in the same way. Like each country has responded a bit differently. Taiwan, this isn't their first rodeo, right? They had MERS, they had SARS, they had chicken virus and chicken flu and all these things. And I think it's because of that they were able to really respond, put controls in place, lock down the borders, really identify the people that were coming in, where were they coming from, and quickly quarantine. And so as a result, we had less than 500 confirmed cases.
Nice.
And, a handful of deaths. As a result, maybe not specifically COVID, but related illnesses, things that maybe exacerbated existing problems. So yeah, but at the larger region, Australia, they're on lockdown still to this day. Each state kind of has their own rules, but for the most part, it's, you stay at home. You get fined if you leave your house. So for our customer base, it's been interesting because I don't think anybody was ready for this, right? No one was mentally ready for it. But from a business perspective, same situation. Companies that they spend years doing digital transformation, but overnight they were forced into hyper, digital transformation,
right,
where they had to take this huge workforce and push them, out to, the edges of the cities, and they had to give them the same services to be able to do their job overnight. So for the security groups and the people that we deal with specifically, it was a major challenge, and they realized where their flaws were in the program, and so they had to stand up services, right? And you see, like Zoom, right? Zoom became extremely popular overnight, and then it exposed their own flaws, their own security flaws. So it's the same thing with VPN services, the same thing with Microsoft products, Outlook Web Access. These other products that were enabling the workforce. So that's what we've seen with our customer base out here. But I think it's the same story globally, where people had to play catch up really quickly. And the threat actors, the people who wanted to capitalize on it, whether it was people who were already trying to infiltrate the organizations or just scammers and opportunists, they flourished. Overnight, it was tremendous. The number of scams that came online and attacks. Really, if you can exploit, this bad situation for an organization that you've been trying to get into for a long time, then you will. And that's what happened. That's what we saw. So whereas the rest of the world was sort of bunkering down and, they were, maybe not doing so much, cybersecurity, there was no rest. Even to this day, there's no rest for a lot of the practitioners, people who are really doing the work, because everything's digital now, hyper digital transformation overnight. And people were caught off guard. So,
and even with all those flaws, just a footnote or two, even with all those flaws, the Zoom stock has gotten to close to 60 billion with the B, which is worth more than the 4 largest US airlines combined. So it's like a statement about digital transformation, which is, you can have this little company, which I remember seeing the business plan and I thought, man, these guys are giving this stuff away for free. How are they going to make any money? And they were like, no, people will use it and then they'll upgrade, I know a lot of people that use the full 40 minutes and they don't upgrade. And they're like, I like having the time limits. I want to stop after 40 minutes. Maybe they're going to change that. Maybe they're going to shorten it. I think they're trying to do some things. But even with all those security flaws they had, and they have to get really competent in security for sure, a $60 billion enterprise was created, and over and above the 4 airlines. I mean, it's quite a statement about the effect of digital transformation. And with it is all of the garbage that happens, all the nutty Zoom bombing and crazy stuff that happens, because there are wacko people and criminals and organizations. And people don't understand that these organizations are actually organized. I mean, this is like organized crime. I mean, this is
really
like the way it was in the roaring 20s, 100 years ago, of organized crime. It's now online as organized crime from all sorts of places, both inside the United States as well as outside the United States. But I'm curious about where you are now. Do people have kind of a prejudicial view generally towards China, the way you're seeing some of that in the US play out, particularly the Trump side of things, where, hey, China knew this way ahead of time, why didn't they stop it? Or is Taipei a little bit more sort of, hey, stuff like this happens, MERS, SARS, avian flu, it's just the way life is. The planet is under a lot of pressure. We're going to see this happen. I'm kind of curious what the cultural reaction is where you are. What are you seeing or hearing?
Yeah. I think a lot of that rhetoric stops at the U.S. borders from what I've seen, right? People see it for what it is. And especially in Taiwan. Taiwan is very, very pro-U.S. Taiwan is caught in a weird spot, diplomatically, right? They're China, but they're not China. They're their own democracy. They have a president.
Right.
The U.S. sells them arms, like billions of dollars of arms that they may never use ever. Right. Because if it ever comes down to China physically taking over, invading, then the actual country is divided into two. The people who have an allegiance to their ethnicity, China and Chinese people, and people who and the other half are people who would wish that the U.S. would just lasso the tip of Taiwan and pull it over to Hawaii or something, So this is an older generation typically who had good experiences with the United States and were part of this thriving economy, the miracle in Asia when Taiwan really just exploded, economically. So of course that generation favors the United States, but China has been really working hard to win the hearts of the youth in Taiwan by, opening the doors to them. Where Taiwan, maybe the economy is kind of just steady or maybe slowly declining, the pay is not so great and the opportunities aren't so robust. And so when the youth looks across to China, they see opportunity and a chance to get ahead and really grow as a professional. So China has opened the doors to that. So it's a weird divide, but as far as the rhetoric coming out of the United States, it resonates with some people who maybe pay more attention to that. But for the most part, it's this connection to China that isn't easily described because it's ethnic, it's economic, it's this vision of a better life. And people in Taiwan and Taipei, when they look across at Shanghai or some of these other tier 1 cities, they see a prosperous place. They see people making money and having a good career, a good budding career. So yeah, do they pay attention to what's coming out of the U.S. leaders' mouths? Not so much, not so much. The chairman level, the people, the C levels, they pay attention only because it hits their bottom line, right? What the U.S. is doing impacts Taiwan, and sometimes in a positive way, other times in a negative way. Companies have relocated out of China just to sidestep these sanctions that are happening. Right. And they've relocated into Southeast Asia, maybe Vietnam or the Philippines, some of their operations where they could. But again, that's focused on the bottom line.
So it sounds like quite a contrast then from Hong Kong, because it seems like Hong Kong is in total turmoil and total anti-China at the moment. It seems like where you are, there's maybe more of a, hey, China's got a lot to offer and let's not be so negative. It looks like Hong Kong is almost the opposite, right?
I think Hong Kong is an interesting case, right? I was there when the protests were happening, when they first kicked off, and I think it's similar. Like in the U.S. right now, we have protests. Like these cities are burning right now across the U.S. Right. Right. When Mr. Floyd was killed, by the police, it hit a nerve on people. So it was the same thing in Hong Kong. when the protest first started about China exerting its influence, where it forced people to pick a side. You know, do we go with status quo and, you know, just eventually Hong Kong will be a part of China completely, or do we fight it, you know, and just really hope that democracy will prevail, you know, right. the flavor of democracy that they had. So when you're on the street, that's what you see. You see the young people who, you know, they have this vision of democracy and the things that they enjoy. Even it's simple stuff like, can you access Google? Can you access Facebook and some of those services? They don't want that impacted, right? Whereas the older generation, you know, maybe they didn't go out on the street, right? So what we saw on TV was a sampling of the population, right? But is it truly representative of the larger group? I don't know about that. So now, with the second round of influence from China, basically saying, "Hey, we're going to come in and you're going to be more like us. Here are the rules." You know, you don't see the protests as much, right? I think it's people who have sort of realized that this day would come, right? And they gave it a go the first go round with the protest, but the second round it's not as, even though the second round has more teeth, you know, the legislation that's changing. So it's very similar, but then of course you see what the news wants you to see. So it's not always representative of what's really happening.
So tell us a little bit about, you have a special credential called a PMP, and a lot of people don't know that actually takes a lot of work and a lot of testing to become a professional project manager. Or is it project manager professional? Like, tell us what that is. Tell us what you did to get that credential and how it plays into the work you do for RiskIQ.
Definitely. So I think credentials they've been kind of interesting, right? Some people don't really care about credentials. They do the job. They're a practitioner. They establish their experience, and they don't need to justify that in any way. You know, they don't need a professional organization to say, "You're qualified. Here's your stamp of approval." And it's always been the debate, right? So in the early days, I was doing a lot of networking. So at routers, switches, like the core building blocks of the internet and company networks.
For which there are a lot of Cisco credentials. There's a lot of stuff you can get, right?
It's endless. You know, like these are businesses. You know, the Project Management Institute, who governs the PMP, and they have other certs, and all the Cisco certs. And they have ISACA has a bunch of certs that are security focused. So you have all these organizations that are running a business, essentially. It's a training business, and they keep you engaged. But again, when it comes down to what does it really mean? Some organizations, they target that. They say, we have projects to manage. We need a project manager who is accredited, they're certified, they put in the hours, they put in they did the job. So they need that box checked. And so that's typically what drives people to get these certs. And that's what drove me to do it. When I was hiring for technical people in a networking field, I would look for certain certs like a CISSP, right. Different Cisco certs that show different levels of, are you expert level, so on and so forth. But it was an indicator. And if they didn't have that, then of course you look at their experience to say, okay, well, did they do something equivalent that we can talk about in a conversation? So from a hiring perspective, it's helpful. For me, it was really helpful for the PMP specifically because I was managing projects without a PMP. And the company at the time that I was working for, they said, look, in order for us to bill you out at a higher rate to
right.
our customer,
right.
They require you to have this thing. We don't care because you're managing the contract, so it's not a big deal. But right. Do you mind, we'll pay for it, do you mind getting it? So I put the time in and we knocked it out.
But it was a pretty substantial amount of time, right? You have to study a thick book and it has like lots of sections to it. I remember because at one point many years ago, I actually took the training because I thought that eventually there would be a role for this in the legal area. And right now there is something that's trying to take the PMP and bring it into legal. And I do think many of the same principles apply. A case is a project. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has stakeholders. It has goals. It has budgets. It has timelines. It's not just like some software with a Gantt chart. That's kind of a nice eye candy thing. There's actual scientific, sort of almost engineering like principles for how do you make sure a project is running its course in a way that doesn't derail, because a lot of projects do derail. A lot of software projects derail. I mean, you could argue the whole SaaS movement is because enterprise software derailed as a general category. The idea of putting in a big Oracle system was like, this may fail 50% of the time. Are you okay with that risk? Hey man, I'll just take, Salesforce, put Salesforce in and QuickBooks, and I'm off to the races. I don't want to do anything bigger than that. And of course, you've got a lot of people that are running big companies on essentially SaaS systems, whether they're provided by Oracle, and now they've moved in that direction with the acquisition of NetSuite or SAP or something else. So it's interesting because RiskIQ is very much a SaaS system, but you still do some project work at each customer account. Can you explain what that is and how it gets done and what the typical sort of set of hands are that work that out for a customer?
And I agree. It's, each one of these are individual projects from start to finish. As you described, you have stakeholders, you have tasks, you have a beginning, you have an end, you have definition as to what you want to accomplish. So each one of these things have like milestones behind them. So yeah, looking through that book that you were talking about, the PMP Bible, essentially,
right.
It goes into extreme detail about how you do each one of these things in a very methodical way, repeatable way. And then of course, applying that, each organization applies it a little bit differently. So here in Region, we have so many stakeholder groups. We have internal stakeholders, sales team, technical team, engineering, all these people who are kind of supporting the activities of a sale or delivery of a product. And then on the customer side, you have, different levels of engagement. There's the pre-sales, you're just having a first conversation with them. You're having a third conversation. Oh, they actually subscribe. Now you're deploying and maintaining. And now they're moving away. So you want to close out the account. So all of that stuff, there are individual projects and tasks involved with each one of those, right? And it's easy to lose sight of some of these things if they're not managed really tight in a tight way.
Right.
And so I would say that the PMP and the mindset of viewing the world in that way, as a project, as a stakeholder, this thing impacts that thing. There's dependencies. There's lead time for these. It's pretty important, I would say, to actually execute. Especially like most of us in our company are dispersed globally, right? I mean, even prior to COVID, we were work from home force. So when you're in that situation, you have to make decisions on your own. You have to manage your own time. You have to, take all your tasks into account. Versus like in a traditional business, you have someone hanging over your shoulder who's telling you to do these things. So they're your taskmaster. They're your, project manager essentially. But when you're on your own, in your day with where you're spending your hours, you have to manage your own time. And that's where I would say that education and that cert really, really comes in handy, because it's already pushing you in that way to think about those things versus just freestyle and not doing anything like that.
What do you think, when you think of the way this is all evolving, what do you think of as the real tool? Because I think it's not necessarily email anymore. Is it something more like Slack or Teams, or where do you think it's going? I mean, historically, I could tell you lawyers were very reluctant to even get on email. Like a lot of them were like, don't put a computer on my desk. I don't want to type. I'm not a secretary. And then eventually, of course, the computers got on desks and they started typing, and a lot of lawyers took typing classes. I, of course, started typing in high school. I mean, even before high school, in grade school, I remember taking classes with the typewriter because there weren't computers yet. But as you look at the evolution of lawyers, they have started to even install and have their clients be on the firm's Slack system, or they're on the client's Slack system. And there's still a lot of lawyers like, what's Slack and how does it work and how's it different? And I'm wondering whether you're seeing an evolution, because you're very much wrapped into this remote workforce, but you got to stay glued enough to what's going on. So what is the way that happens? I know some videos, some phone calls, some Skypes, all that stuff, but what's the tool? Is it still email in your judgment, or has it become more Slack, or has it become Teams, or what do you think it's become, and where's it going?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of social media. Like I really, I'm not. You know, I understand the value of social media, and I get it. You know, Facebook, big organization, and they've changed the world, and they continue to change the world every day. But I don't really subscribe to a lot of the activity and the behavior in social media. But I think that was the beginning of this shift, and it's a culture shift, like the way we communicate. And then smartphones really, you know, just made that just go to all corners of the world. You know, if I can send you a note, you know, and I say BRB, what does that mean? You know, or TTYL, talk to you later, be right back. So this shorthand, you know, all this stuff really came about with smartphones and even cell phones in the early days. And so now we're just at an evolved point. You know, the same thing. You know, social media, smartphones. Now it's Slack and Zoom. It's really evolved to where we're just communicating in a different way, and that's penetrated the businesses. So Slack, super popular, right? I mean, their stock is what, you know, $36 or something like that.
Right.
And you know, I think a big part of that was just like Zoom, similar story, where COVID has really forced people to adopt this different way of communicating much quicker than they were 6 months ago, right? So we see that in region here, and it's across the board. Even Southeast Asia, which is typically adopting technologies a bit later, they're inviting us, as you described, you know, to their Slack channels, so that they can, at any given moment, reach out and ask a question, or report an issue, or just, you know, whatever, send a message. So this hyper connectivity, you know, this different form of communication where, you know, I need to reach you at any given moment, right? Whether that's in messaging, you know, Facebook, you know, LinkedIn, all the super apps like WeChat and, you know, WhatsApp and all of these.
Right.
This is just an extension of that same culture, but it's all over Asia as well too, and that's just the Western companies. I mean, you go into China and they have their own versions of these same technologies. But yeah, it's pretty rampant. But I would say it's the main motivator is just because we're communicating differently, right?
Well, do you miss anything from the U.S. at all? You're fully planted now in Asia. Do you miss any aspect, like bagels or something you can't get there?
We can get everything here. Like literally, like we're so hyper connected. Like the world is so hyper connected. You can get anything, right? I can go, you know, to the train station and get Krispy Kreme. It's a guilty little pleasure. I do that every once in a while.
Okay, so you really, it sounds like you're there and you're staying there, or are you thinking, no, Australia? Some people think the safe zone is Australia or New Zealand, but I'm kind of curious, what do you think of a world in turmoil? And you're planted in Taiwan at the moment, but you could just as well be planted, I suppose, in Australia or New Zealand, right?
I've lived in different countries. So I lived in Germany, I lived in South Korea, and of course the US, and then here, Taiwan. So yeah, this is a utopia. It's a little oasis, because since it is kind of in this weird spot politically, then you know, people really don't bother Taiwan. It doesn't hit the news, the headlines that often, unless it's Trump using it as a political tool, right, to kind of like beat up on China or something. But beyond that, it's a great place. You know, fresh fruit. Like when I came here, I actually tasted fruit. You know, in the U.S., I didn't taste fruit. I tasted some variation of a object that was sitting on a boat for a month. You know?
Oh, okay. So you're saying the quality of some things is far better than the U.S. quality?
I would say it is. You know, so fruit tastes like fruit. They have national health care here, so I pay, you know, very small amount every month to get access to just national health care. I can walk into a doctor at any given moment, be seen for anything. I pay the equivalent of $3 for a copay, and that gives me access to healthcare, right? And these are doctors that are educated in the U.S. and European universities, medical schools, and they just come back home, Taiwan, and they practice. So yeah, I would say that the same luxuries that you might experience in the US, you can get them here really at a fraction of the cost, and it's a good quality of life. People, they don't harass you. I don't feel like I'm being nickeled and dimed by the government for fees and penalties for letting your grass grow too long, or you parked the car on the sidewalk on the wrong day.
Right.
That doesn't exist, and so it feels freer than a free country.
Now, do you have a car, or do you just get around locally on mass transportation? Like, it's not that big, right? You're basically in a big city, right?
Yeah, and for many years, like I've been here for 6 years roughly, and for many years, there was no need to have a vehicle, but it wasn't until recently, I decided, okay, well, maybe it's time just to get a car, and that's mostly because I like hiking and mountain adventures, and Taiwan has all of that, and so to get access to some of those, the buses and the trains don't always take you there, so yeah, it was just a small shift, but for the most part. Yeah, the public transportation is super efficient. You go to a bus stop and there's the digital readout on where the bus is, how many minutes away, and same thing with the metro system.
And you get on with your smartphone, right? You don't even need to carry any sort of coins, right? You get on with a digital account with your smartphone, don't you?
You can. There's different ways to do it, but you can use your smartphone. They have a stored value card as well.
Okay.
You just tap it. So as you're walking through the turnstiles, the buses and all this, even if you walk into one of the many convenience stores, 7-Elevens, Family Marts, you use the same card, stored value, you just tap it and then you pay.
Sometimes I think that the fintech in Asia is far, far ahead of the fintech in the US. It's shocking. I mean, it's shocking.
That has something to do with regulation, like each country has either adopted or rejected. In different ways. But no, I completely agree with you. Like fintech, a lot of these companies that were not restricted in their respective market, but were restricted in the US when they were trying to decide where they want to go. They stayed here, So, but yeah, it's for a lot of these reasons. So you look at WeChat, in China, where you use a QR code to pay for everything, and it's common. Grab, Taxi in Singapore, they're the Southeast Asia Uber, essentially.
Right.
They have built this monster application, a super app that allows you to pay for everything. You pay for your bills, you can exchange money with people, right, at no cost. It's really blowing up. It really is. But it's such an interesting time to be alive, I would say, in technology, especially with something like fintech.
So the last question I have is, you're fundamentally an American in a foreign country, probably with work ethics like we have in Silicon Valley, which is long hours, weekends. You're working right now, sort of, because we're doing this. It's a weekend. Is there a different culture and attitude towards work there in Hong Kong, Asia, where you are? It may be different in all those different countries, or are they moving towards this 4-day work week? People are starting to talk here in the US about maybe it's going to be a 4-day work week, and maybe people will only go to an office 3 days a week and they'll work 1 day at home, and then it's basically a 4-day work week, or half a day on Monday and half a day on Friday. Are you seeing any of that where you are, or is it, hey, people work really long hours here as well, even when they're pure Asians?
I think that there's two different groups, right? I would say that the first group, which most companies fall into in Asia, they're still very traditional companies. Like if you break each country apart a little bit and look at Japan, Japanese bosses still have secretaries, right? And they like that traditional role, right? They're very, very, very functional, very traditional in that sense. So adopting a shorter work week or even work from home is very foreign to them, right? Versus like Hong Kong, even here in Taiwan, Singapore, they're inching closer to that kind of behavior, right? Being able to work from home. The shorter work week, I don't know if they'll ever see that. People work a lot here. They really do. And, they work a lot. They put in a lot of hours, and it's good and bad. The concept is work hard and that's, and make a lot of money, work hard, just do a good job. And that's instilled even in like family values. It's instilled in the individual. So as a result, people don't really complain about that. It's just a part of the culture. But then the other side of it is you have companies like either US based companies, companies coming out of Silicon Valley, or there's a lot of Israeli companies as well coming into the scene that are not going to the US. They're coming straight to Asia and then just penetrating the market, that are kind of bringing that work culture with them. Whereas, work from home, unlimited leave kind of policy, get it done when you get it done. Here's your deadlines. You do it at 3 a.m., you do it at 3 p.m., whatever, just get it done. So I think that other side of things is also present in a lot of the major countries, in Hong Kong, Singapore, and then even here in Taiwan. So that's the startup mentality that I think the Silicon Valley created, and they've just kind of adapted it to their own appetite, their own what they feel feels appropriate.
So do you see yourself coming back to America? I'm curious. It sounds like you've fallen in love with where you are. Do you imagine ever coming back?
It's so challenging. It's so challenging. Like, I think, like, I'm a free spirit. I'm a free soul. Like, I don't, like, I have an allegiance to my country, obviously. And I even served, in the military for a while, for my country. But it's not the only country on the globe, right? And, these borders, to me, that it's invisible. I don't see, the US, Japan, I could live anywhere. And so some people are completely okay with that. And so now, I'm an expat, and the people that I mingle with are essentially either expats or local. And so it takes a certain person to be okay with that kind of life, right? We all have families. We want to be with our families in our respective countries, but to put all that behind, to start a new life in a new country, it takes a certain person to do that and even be successful doing that, right? It's not easy, right? I mean, you look at the United States, and right now it almost seems like a war on immigrants, with every political cycle that comes through, whether it's, the immigrants that are coming in from the South or the immigrants that are coming in from the East, right? Who are these immigrants? But it's amazing. These people have given up so much just to pull roots and start a whole new life in a country. So to see it from that perspective, that's been my life. I've been living that in every country that I've lived in. But I enjoy it. I enjoy the cultures, experiencing each one of the cultures. And then of course, the Asia culture, just in general. I think there is a certain common theme in most Asian countries. Will I go back to the US? I don't know. It's going to be a tough sell, giving up healthcare and having to pay hundreds and thousands every month for mediocre healthcare. I don't know if I can do that.
Well, you look really happy. So we'll end on that note, and hopefully I'll send you an email and we'll do a part 2 of what it is that you really do find challenging. Because right now it sounds like, hey man, I'm in utopia, and don't even get me a first class ticket because I'm not coming back. So it's interesting to see a happy face. I see so many people that are under strife and they think the world is ending. Of course, I remain pretty optimistic. I always have been that way. And I'm glad you are too. So thanks for spending part of your Saturday with me. I'll look forward to doing a part 2 at some point, maybe after the 4th of July. Maybe we'll actually be sort of back to some new normal by then. But in the meantime, go get them in Asia. It sounds like you're firing on all 12 cylinders, and that's great to see.
No, thanks for setting this up. I do appreciate it. It was good chatting with you.
Good.
There's so many areas to explore, with cybersecurity, with RiskIQ, with what we're doing as a company, kind of where we are in the globe. Like, right. I mentioned this earlier, but this exact time to be alive.
Yes.
It's wild.
So do me a favor, if you haven't done it, listen to the interviews I did with Brandon, which are telling the early part of the story that I witnessed, because I didn't want to take your bandwidth to repeat all that, and give me your feedback on what you learned, what you didn't know, because I'd like to know how I can complete that story. And I'm queuing up Lou and then CK and a bunch of other people. So it'd be interesting to get a perspective from an audience, and maybe you'll leave a review too when you listen to that and then we'll publish this one too. And you'll see how this stuff is all meant to fit in. Really more of as a function of, as we bring new people on, they should know more about the history, because there's a rich history and you're part of it now and you've been part of it for a while. So it's good to kind of get you to explain it and how it extends Silicon Valley really to the other side of the world. It's what 1:40 or so in the afternoon your time, and it's 10:40 or 50 my time. So we're bridging a time zone or several time zones here. So thanks for spending the time. I look forward to part 2. Hopefully you'll listen to the brand and stuff. I actually have Zan on there too. You might want to listen to that too.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. Enjoy your evening, and looking forward to part 2 as well.
You too. Thanks, Hans. Bye.
Thanks, Jack. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to RiskIQ Radio.